The first time Nolan Dawson saw the inside of a Trinari interrogation chamber, he laughed. Not because it was funny, nothing in that smooth, humming, oval-shaped room was remotely comedic, but because the alien standing across from him had just said, in a tone that might have been casual if it weren't so chilling, "You will likely not survive past the third hour." Nolan's wrists were locked into a cool metallic brace that ran up to his elbows. His boots had been removed. The floor pulsed faintly under his bare feet, like a heartbeat. The lights overhead were soft and blue, but there was a sharp chemical smell in the air that stung his nose. The alien, tall and metallic gray, had no visible eyes or mouth, just a flat face with shifting ridges. Its name was Relac, and it had studied human anatomy for 2 years. Nolan coughed, blinked up at Relac, and said, "I've survived worse." Relac tilted its head. "That is unlikely. Try me." The first pulse hit his calves. It wasn't pain, not exactly. More like every nerve in his legs was being tested for compliance. Relac watched closely, noting his muscle tension, his breathing, his heart rate. Nolan gritted his teeth. A bead of sweat rolled down his forehead, but he didn't groan. "Your species has a high pain threshold," Relac said. "Yeah, we also invented deep-fried butter and willingly electrocute ourselves for fun at carnivals," Nolan said, jaw tightening. "Pain's relative." The second wave came stronger. Nolan's legs buckled slightly. The brace held him upright. He let out a sharp breath. "Why did you enter restricted Trinari airspace?" Relac asked. "I got lost. You crossed 3 precision-marked boundaries. I'm not great with directions." Relac stepped forward, its long fingers adjusting something on the panel beside Nolan. A new sensation gripped his back, hot, prickling heat like a sunburn being applied in real time. "I'm gonna assume this is your version of a polygraph," Nolan muttered. "You assume incorrectly." "Fantastic." He lasted another 27 minutes before his body gave in. Not unconscious, but slumped, eyes fluttering. Still, when Relac leaned in and said, "You are reaching your species' limit," Nolan croaked. "Ever had kidney stones? Try passing one the size of a peanut in a truck stop bathroom while someone's jiggling the handle." Relac paused. "That is not medically possible. You'd be amazed." The interrogation ended not because Nolan gave up information he hadn't, but because Relac concluded that the human was not a pilot, but a civilian who had commandeered a transport ship after a bar fight on Penthra 9. One dead alien, 2 broken ribs, and a planetary blockade later, he had crash-landed on Trinari soil. The medical bay was silent except for the steady beep of a heart monitor. Nolan's left arm was in a sling, and 4 fed clear fluid into his right. His ribs were taped. A large bruise bloomed across his abdomen. A Trinari medic hovered nearby, scanning his vitals. "Your skeletal system is compromised," the medic said. "2 ribs, not the whole system," Nolan replied, voice hoarse. "I've had worse." "Your humor response remains active despite injury." "Fascinating." A week passed. Nolan was moved to a holding cell with a cot and a single translucent window. The Trinari assigned him a contact, a diplomatic liaison named Velen. Velen was shorter than Relac, and more curious than hostile. "You understand your actions could have led to war?" Velen asked during their first meeting. "I was trying to get home," Nolan said. "Didn't know the ship had a hyperdrive override. Didn't know your sector was restricted. You incapacitated a Trinari officer. He was choking a waitress. She was not a waitress. Still didn't deserve to be choked." Velen studied him. "You are either reckless or extraordinarily unlucky." "Why not both?" Velen's head twitched. "You do not behave as expected. Get used to it." Over the next month, Nolan was subjected to a series of tests, not painful ones, just assessments. Strength, balance, logic puzzles, endurance. He failed most of the logic puzzles, but held a plank position for 17 minutes before collapsing. He ate everything they gave him, including a gelatinous blue paste that tasted like burnt marshmallows. He asked for hot sauce. They didn't understand, so he tried to make it with fermented kelp extract and powdered iron. It exploded. He spent 3 days in solitary for that. When the Trinari High Council reviewed his case, they invited Nolan to attend. He limped into the chamber, left arm still stiff. Velen accompanied him. "He's shown resilience," Velen said, addressing the council, "and a stubborn refusal to die. That's just Tuesdays where I come from," Nolan muttered. The council approved his release on the condition that he assist in human behavioral studies. He agreed. mostly because he wanted real food and a bed that didn't hum. The research station was carved into the side of a cliff on Solon Prime. Nolan was given quarters with an ocean view and a schedule that included physical therapy, interviews, and occasional cultural demonstrations. He taught a group of Trinari how to arm wrestle. He lost to a 3-limbed adolescent named Tal. "Your musculature is inferior," Tal said proudly. "Yeah, well, I sprained my wrist opening a jar this morning," Nolan replied. "Give me a rematch next week." He learned to walk again without pain, but the cold mornings made his ribs ache. A human trauma specialist was dispatched from Earth to assess his condition. Her name was Maren Olstead. She arrived wearing boots caked with red dust and a dark green jacket with a patch that read, "UNF Recovery Team." "You're Nolan Dawson?" she asked, stepping into his room. "Unless there's another guy here with a history of poor decisions and broken bones." "I read your file," she said, setting down her bag. "It's surprisingly short for someone who caused a minor diplomatic incident. I like to keep things concise." Maren ran a full assessment over the next 3 days. She checked his lung capacity, his range of motion, his pain response. "You've got scar tissue around the rib cage," she said, tapping his side gently. "No re-breaks, but it'll bother you in cold environments." "Noted. Also, your left shoulder's healing slower than it should. Probably because I tried to wrestle an alien teenager." "I heard." She didn't smile, but her eyes softened. They worked together for 2 weeks, gradually increasing his physical activity. Nolan was cooperative, but restless. He hated being still. "Why'd you take this job?" he asked one afternoon as they sat on the station's observation deck. "Someone had to drag your stubborn self back to Earth," Maren said. "And I needed the travel miles." "You ever try the blue paste?" "Once. My stomach still holds a grudge." By the end of the month, Nolan could run short distances, climb stairs without wincing, and lift a crate without assistance. Velen visited him one evening, holding a data slate. "There's a training exercise scheduled on Zarni's base," Velen said. "Joint species. Simulated combat. We need human representation." "You think I'm fit to fight?" "Not yet. But you're better than most of our volunteers." Nolan hesitated. "What's the simulation?" "A crash scenario. Hostile environment. Limited resources." "Sounds like a Tuesday." He agreed. The drop onto Zarni's was rough. The simulated crash site was a blasted desert basin with jagged rocks and temperatures hovering near 110 degrees by midday. Nolan's team included 2 Trinari, a Falari scout, and a silent reptilian creature named Doss. Within the first hour, one of the Trinari twisted his ankle. Nolan made a splint using his own undershirt and 2 carbon rods from a broken comms unit. Velen watched from a remote feed. By hour 5, they were dehydrated and sunburned. The Falari collapsed. Nolan carried her for 2 miles until they reached the extraction point. When the shuttle doors opened and Nolan stumbled inside, his shirt stained with sweat and dust, a young Trinari technician asked, "How are you still standing?" Nolan dropped the Falari gently onto a stretcher, leaned against the bulkhead, and laughed. "I've survived worse." He meant it. The ceiling in the recovery wing of Zarni's base flickered with a faint mauve glow, uninterrupted except for the occasional sweep of a maintenance drone. Nolan was lying flat on a padded slab, both arms stretched out, one hooked to a fluid line, the other beneath a thermal scanner. His shirt had been cut away, and a swirling red abrasion trailed from his right shoulder to the middle of his back. "You have sun trauma layer with dermal blistering," said the attending Trinari nurse without looking up from her console. Her face was featureless except for a single translucent membrane where her forehead should have been, and it pulsed faintly as she spoke. "Yeah, it felt like I was being slow roasted on a parking lot," Nolan said. "Don't suppose you've got aloe?" "Aloe. Never mind." He winced as a gel sprayed across his burn. It hissed faintly, numbing the skin almost immediately. The nurse adjusted the scanner. "You pushed your cardiac load past its safety margin for over 2 hours," said a voice from the opposite side of the slab. It belonged to a Relari observer half Nolan's height, twice as broad, with a rigid amber crest where its nose should have been. It held a tablet that shifted colors as it passed under its own eyes. "No one else was going to carry her," Nolan said, shifting his weight just enough to make his ribs ache again. "Didn't think you guys would appreciate me leaving one of your own face down in the dust. That was not one of ours. Falari are independent. Even more reason not to leave her." The Relari tapped a corner of its tablet. "That level of exertion should have caused muscular collapse." Your tissue enzymes suggest significant micro-tearing. I'll take the fancy words as confirmation that I'm still alive. Barely, the nurse muttered, applying another layer of gel. He gritted his teeth, but said nothing. The next morning, before he'd even gotten upright, a team of 3 Trinari biologists filed into the room. One wheeled in a cart filled with instruments Nolan didn't recognize. Another held a stylus and a display board, its surface covered in motion diagrams and temperature maps. The third simply stood near the doorway, observing. "Is this about the simulation?" Nolan asked, not bothering to sit up. "Yes," said the one with the diagrams. "We have not previously recorded a human functioning through that degree of systemic duress without collapse. We need to understand the mechanism. I told you, I just didn't want to leave her. Motivation does not account for cellular behavior. Your blood pH remains stable despite dehydration. That should not be possible. Maybe it's all the coffee." They didn't react. "Joke," he added. Still nothing. The one with the stylus pointed to a chart. "Can you describe the sensation in your thoracic region during the last segment of exertion? Like someone was pressing a hot engine coil into my chest every time I breathed. Was there auditory distortion? Yeah, sounded like the inside of a tunnel filled with bees. Or maybe I was just dizzy. Did your extremities lose sensation? Left hand went numb for a bit. Came back when I sat down." The biologist tapped several times on the board. The third Trinari, still silent near the door, finally stepped forward and removed a small device from its belt. It extended a thin arm, ending in a soft bulb, and gestured toward Nolan's forehead. "What's that?" "Neurothermal reader," the first one said. "It measures stress distribution across your cortical network." "Does it hurt?" "No." "Then go ahead." "I'm not using it for anything important right now." They scanned his head, then his upper spine. The bulb blinked colors Nolan couldn't name, and the Trinari murmured in their own language clicks and vowel-heavy hums. "Your species' tolerance for cellular strain is anomalous," one of them concluded. Nolan sat up slowly, legs dangling off the slab. "Or maybe we're just used to pushing through it. You ever see a human desk worker sprint through the rain to catch a bus with a dislocated knee and a cup of coffee in their hand? That's dedication. That is dysfunction," the third one corrected. "Semantics." Later that day, after the biologists had filed out, Velen arrived. He wore an outer layer that shimmered with humidity-reactive threads, and his expression was unreadable, as always. "You're being transferred," he said without preamble. Nolan's eyebrows rose. "To where?" "Gentari Research Dome. You'll be part of a cross-species comparative study." "Does that mean more scans and poking?" "Yes, but also compensation." "Define compensation." "Private quarters. Access to non-restricted food items. Permission to communicate with Earth." Nolan scratched his jaw. "You offering that because I passed your little desert obstacle course?" "No. Because you made the Rolari admit a miscalculation." That gave him pause. "They don't do that often?" "They have never done it." "Well, I'll try not to let it go to my head." The journey to Gentari took 6 days by transport barge. Nolan was the only human on board, sharing the vessel with 4 Trinari, a pair of insectoid Ninvith engineers, and a Gelari linguist who dissolved into vapor when embarrassed, which was often, given Nolan's conversational style. He spent most of the voyage reading translated reports about comparative physiology. One paper suggested humans had an underdeveloped pain inhibition system. Another proposed the opposite, that they had evolved to ignore damage to ensure social cohesion during crises. Nolan wasn't sure what either meant, but it made for decent reading. On the 5th day, while eating a protein square that tasted like lemon and ash, he found himself in the observation lounge with one of the Ninvith. Its body was sleek and jointless, its limbs covered in fine bristles that twitched when it moved. "You are the one from Zarnes," it said, not turning toward him. "Depends who's asking." "I am Turn. I reviewed the footage. You bypassed 3 hydration opportunities. I didn't want to slow the team. Efficiency is not your species' strength. Thanks for the vote of confidence. You were inefficient, but persistent. I'll take that as a compliment." Turn's bristles fluttered. "Your body failed to shut down under duress. That is statistically unusual. You're all very obsessed with how close I got to collapsing. Because by all known models, you should have. But you altered your pace, redistributed your weight, changed your breathing pattern. None of this was taught. I used to run marathons," Nolan said. "You learned tricks." "What is a marathon?" "Long-distance run with no immediate purpose." Turn was silent for a moment. "That sounds inefficient." "It is. That's the point. When they arrived at Gentari, the station's domed structure loomed like a glass hemisphere embedded in a crater. Inside, gravity was slightly lighter, which made walking feel oddly springy. Nolan was assigned quarters near the southern edge, with a view of a geothermal vent that pulsed like a slow heartbeat in the dark rock. Over the next several days, he was subjected to new tests. Not invasive, mostly performance under altered conditions. They changed his oxygen levels, adjusted temperatures, monitored his reaction times. He ran on a treadmill that inclined at impossible angles. He floated in a tank with shifting magnetic fields. At one point, he was asked to hold a conversation while submerged in a thick, syrupy liquid that muted sound. "You adjusted after 13 seconds, said the technician afterward. Most subjects panic. "I've been to a public pool in July," Nolan said. Same vibe. One evening, he returned to his quarters to find a message waiting not from Earth, but from Velen. "Your results are consistent with extreme adaptability," the message said. "They are requesting you attempt the next phase. You may decline." Nolan stared at the screen. His shoulders still ached. His legs were sore. He hadn't eaten anything that truly resembled food in weeks. He tapped the interface. "What does the next phase involve?" The reply came seconds later. "Simulated vacuum exposure." He exhaled, long and slow. "Sure. Let's see how long I last." Nolan stood barefoot on the grated floor of chamber V3, one hand braced on his hip, the other hanging loose by his side. The room was small, circular, and sterile, its curved walls lined with pale vertical slits that hissed faintly. The air had a sharp, metallic bite. A single overhead ring of light cast a sterile glow that made his skin look gray. Across the chamber, behind a transparent barrier, 3 observers monitored his baseline vitals. One was a Trinari analyst with a cluster of optical nodes arranged in a fan across its scalp. Another was a Phyrexian medic, whose skin glistened with a natural saline sheen. The last was a tall, jointless Marnari who hadn't moved once since Nolan entered the room. "You will experience rapid depressurization over a controlled interval," said the Trinari, not looking up, "followed by brief exposure to near-vacuum conditions. Internal systems will simulate lunar shadow temperature gradients. You may terminate the test at any time." "I thought the point was seeing how far I'd go before I tapped out," Nolan said. The Phyrexian skin pulsed slowly. "Consent remains necessary." "I'm in." "You must not hold your breath," the Trinari added. "This increases risk of alveolar rupture." "Right. Exhale. Like mid-fall during a skydive." That analogy is functionally accurate. Nolan adjusted the snug collar around his neck. It was the only thing he was allowed to wear, a thermal retention band connected to a neural alert system. His ribs still twinged when he inhaled deeply, but the ache had dulled to a background complaint. He rolled his shoulders, then gave a nod. The chamber lights dimmed. A low-frequency hum began beneath his feet, subtle at first, then rising behind his sternum like an oncoming train. The slits in the wall widened by a few millimeters, venting air with a hollow rush. Nolan felt pressure build behind his eyes, then slip away like a tide retreating. The first phase was tolerable. He'd been in high-altitude zones before, felt the thin air of mountain peaks claw at his lungs. This was sharper, though. His breath came shallow. His skin tingled. The temperature dropped fast, like the inside of a freezer with the door ripped off. He exhaled slowly, resisting the urge to tighten his core. His ears popped hard, then rang. A faint tremor passed through his legs. Then came the second phase. The pressure plummeted. The air turned dry and razor-thin. His vision tunneled, the outer edges dimming. He consciously relaxed his jaw, teeth chattering. Frost formed at the edges of his brows. From the observation room, the Trinari recorded the rapid vasoconstriction in his extremities. The Phyrexian watched his blood oxygen saturation drop below 50%. Nolan blinked slowly. A sharp pain bloomed in his chest, but he kept his arms loose and his knees slightly bent. He forced another breath out. He couldn't hear it. The chamber stabilized. Nolan staggered forward a step, then caught himself. "Vitals dropping," the Phyrexian said. "He is compensating," the Marnari replied. Nolan raised his right hand, fingers shaking, and tapped the side of his neck once. The chamber hissed again, this time reversing. Warmth bled back into the air. The lights brightened. 3 minutes, 28 seconds, the Trinari said. Nolan collapsed to his knees, gasping. Felt longer. The door opened. Medics entered with a heated wrap and a portable oxygen feed. Nolan waved them off and dragged himself upright using the wall. After 15 minutes, he was seated in a thermal chamber, sipping a viscous tea that tasted like burnt cinnamon and iron. His fingernails were still pale, but sensation was returning. A monitor displayed his core temperature 34.6 Celsius and rising. A new figure entered. This one was unfamiliar, a short, quadrupedal being with crystalline skin that refracted the light in pulses. It carried a small orb in one limb. "You are the experimental subject," it said. Its voice buzzed low, like a cello string plucked underwater. "Guess that's me," Nolan replied. "I am Hask, evaluator. Your resilience contradicts prediction matrices. Sounds like I'm becoming a hobby. This is not hobby. This is recalibration of biological models." Nolan leaned back. "Glad to be of service." Hask moved closer. "You were aware of the risk of barotrauma. Yeah, yet you proceeded without supplemental oxygen. Your team wanted to see what happened under strain. That usually means no training wheels." Hask tilted its head. "This is not rational behavior. I've never claimed to be rational. You are aware that partial vacuum exposure can cause nitrogen bubbles in tissue. I've had altitude sickness before. I know the drill." Hask was quiet for a moment. "You were not selected for this role by your species leadership." "Nope. I just happened to be in the wrong place at the wrong time. And now you are here, enduring conditions that trained specialists reject." Nolan watched steam rise from the rim of his cup. "Because someone has to. And because you're all watching, waiting for the point where I finally break. That makes it kind of interesting." Hask emitted a tone Nolan couldn't interpret. "Your psychology is inconsistent. So I've been told." Later that cycle, Nolan was examined by a Russian physiologist who performed a full neurovascular scan. The results were reviewed in silence. A secondary probe was inserted behind his left earlobe. He flinched. "Pain?" the Russian asked. "More like pressure, like biting into something too cold. Your trigeminal response is atypical, diminished, could be genetic." "My uncle once pulled his own tooth out with pliers." The Russian did not respond. Back in his quarters, Nolan sat on the floor, legs outstretched, inspecting the faint red lines that had appeared along his lower calves. Microcapillary stress. Not dangerous, just uncomfortable. He rubbed them gently with a cooling gel, then lay back, staring at the ceiling. A low chime sounded. Velen entered, holding a thin tablet. "You are not required to participate in further procedures," Velen said. Did the legal department finally grow a conscience? "The council determined that your cumulative test exposure exceeds permissible thresholds. So I'm officially done being the crash test dummy." "As of now, yes." Nolan sat up. "How'd I do?" "You exceeded projections by 32%. None of the predictive models accounted for your compensatory behaviors." "Meaning?" "Your body performs below average in controlled conditions, but outperforms under threat." He laughed quietly. "That's humanity in a nutshell. There is one final request. I thought you said I was off the hook. This is not a test. It is a demonstration." "For who?" "The research tribunal. They wish to understand your species' psychosocial mechanisms under non-lethal crisis." Nolan raised an eyebrow. "You want me to give a presentation?" "No. They want to observe you in an artificially induced argument with a simulated authority figure." He blinked. "You're putting me in a fake fight?" "It is for academic purposes." "Fine. But only if I can pick the topic." The next day, Nolan stood in a small amphitheater-style room. A holographic projection of a bureaucratic administrator hovered in front of him, spouting protocol violations. The tribunal watched silently from behind a curved wall of glass. Nolan listened for a full 30 seconds before cutting in. "You're telling me I violated Form 87C because I adjusted a thermal wrap without authorization? I was freezing. That's not a violation, that's basic survival." The projection replied in monotone. "You want me to file a request for permission to not die of hypothermia? That's what you're saying." The tribunal took notes. One of them leaned forward. "You ever spent 6 hours in a pressure suit with a leaking seal and no backup?" "I have. I didn't wait for a form. I patched it with a sleeve and a strip of synth tape." The projection continued its rebuke. Nolan stepped forward. "You want to understand human behavior? Here's the truth. We don't do well with waiting to be told what's allowed. We act, we adapt, and then we deal with the fallout." The simulation ended. The projection vanished. Silence hung in the air. Then one of the tribunal members, a pale, thin creature with a spiral of eyes, stood. "This concludes the demonstration. The subject has provided adequate behavioral variance. Nolan exhaled. Glad I could yell constructively. By the end of the week, Nolan was discharged from the program. He was offered transport back to Earth, along with a full debrief. As he packed, Hask visited one last time. You altered our understanding of your species. Wasn't trying to. That is why it occurred. Nolan zipped his bag. So what now? You return to your planet. We revise our protocols. Sounds fair. You will be documented as a statistical anomaly. I've been called worse. When the transport lifted off, Nolan watched the domes of Gentari shrink into the rock. His body still ached, but his breathing felt easier. For the first time in months, he wasn't being measured. He leaned back in his seat, closed his eyes, and whispered to no one in particular, I've survived worse.